Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first of our day. Oh, can you hear me again?
Can hear you now, Lucy.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know what happened there. I'm very sorry about that, everyone.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, welcome to the first of our daily webinars for Invasive Species Week. I'm Lucy Cornwell from the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat, and I'm joined by Professor Helen Roy and Dr. Lucy Arthur from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Before I hand over to them for the talk today, there's just a few quick housekeeping things to go through. So the first is to make you aware that we're recording the webinar today and it will be available on YouTube later, so just so that you're aware you're being recorded. We're going to save questions for the end of the talks, so if you have any questions, please could you write those into the chat box or the Q&A, and I'll read those out at the end. And then finally, if you have any technical issues, you can write those in the chat too, and I will try and help where I can. If in doubt, just try rejoining and joining again, leaving and joining again. That usually helps. But the recording will be available later if you have any real problems. So that's everything from me. So I will hand over to Helen to get started.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I'm just going to check that you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
That's perfect. It's really wonderful to be with you all at the start of Invasive Species Week, and huge thanks to Lucy, as always, for her amazing work in putting everything together for Invasive Species Week, and for inviting Lucy and I to be part of the webinar series. So we are going to give a talk on the impacts of invasive non-native species on native species and habitats across Great Britain. And this work was led, most of what we're going to speak about was led by Rob Cook. But Lucy is going to be including some of the work that she did on her master's project in the middle part of the presentation. And yeah, we hope you enjoy what we've put together, and huge thanks to everyone who has been involved in this work. And some of those people are listed here, but there are many others who've been involved in the collaborative work that I've been involved with over the years. And a huge thanks to DEFRA and ICF as well, for ICF for overseeing the contract, and DEFRA for funding the work. So back in 2019, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, in their first global assessment, published this really stark and quite depressing figure that 1 million species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction. The global assessment is now being repeated. The second global assessment is underway at the moment, and it gives me an opportunity to advertise that there's a chance for you to get involved with reviewing at the moment. Reviewing of the first draft of that is available online through the IPBES website, and it's going to be interesting to see how these figures are looking through this next global assessment, which is leading towards the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework targets. So we know that one of those drivers that's causing that biodiversity loss is the driver of biological invasions, alongside climate change, pollution, overexploitation of natural resources, and land and sea use change. And just to be clear, this is the definition for biological invasions, and there's some other definitions on this slide as well. And this comes from the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform, thematic assessment on invasive alien species and their control, which was approved in 2023. So biological invasions are the process involving the intentional or unintentional transport or movement of species outside of their native range by human activities into a new region where they become established and spread. And it's that human activities that's a really important part of this definition. And of course, in Britain, we're using the term invasive non-native species, but it's synonymous with invasive alien species. And these are the species that are causing some kind of problems, some kind of impact from those that are moved from one part of the world to another. And these are some more figures that came from that IPBES thematic assessment. So we can see here that invasive non-native species are a growing problem. All of those graphs on that panel over towards the left, we can see that on the x-axis with time running along it and the numbers of alien species on the y-axis, for all these different taxonomic groups and all the different regions of the world, the line is going up, that trend line is going up. And when thinking about the kind of impacts that species are causing, we know that there are impacts directly on nature, on nature's contributions to people, which is analogous to the term ecosystem services, so things like pollination, decomposition, predation, but also on good quality of life. So that may be on human health, or it may be on some other aspect of our well-being. And around that figure, which is on the right of the slide, you see that for some of the species, they have multiple impacts. So for example, red imported fire ants will have impacts on nature, also on nature's contributions to people, and also good quality of life. And within this IPBES assessment, there's a whole chapter, chapter 4, all about impacts. So back from that kind of global scene to Britain, and I've had the great privilege since 2008 being involved with the GB Non-Native Species Information Portal. And this portal relies on a whole variety of people getting involved and sharing their data, including project partners, but also data coming from a whole variety of other sources, and also information about species as well. So we gather distribution information about species through iRecord and the National Biodiversity Network Atlas. And we also have a database containing lots and lots of information about these species. And we publish that all through the Non-Native Species Secretariat website through this Non-Native Species Information Portal. And what we can see from that portal is just like those figures that I showed to you before, that over time, the numbers of non-native species is increasing in terrestrial, in marine, and in freshwater systems. And this is the indicator figure that is published on an annual basis through DEFRA. And then I thought I'd show you this picture. So at the moment, I'm in the Caribbean. I'm working on the UK overseas territories. And last week I was on Turks and Caicos Islands, where we've been working as a team in collaboration with amazing project partners there to make predictions about what could be the next species that could arrive on the Turks and Caicos Islands and cause impacts. And this is a picture we had a day out in the field, and this is on North Caicos. And what you can see in the largest picture, the brown needles on the ground are from the casuarina, which is the tree above an invasive non-native tree that was introduced as a windbreak and as erosion control, but unfortunately has spread quite extensively. And you can see that these needles are really smothering the ground. So it would just be sand underneath there if it wasn't for this kind of thick layer of needles. And as you can see, it's quite a kind of dramatic change to that system. But also the concern is that these needles are really highly flammable. And so there is a fire risk associated with this non-native species. I'm now on the Cayman Islands, and this week I'll be working with people here to make predictions about what could be the species that could cause some kind of impact to Grand Cayman and the two other Cayman Islands. And one of the species that's been here that has been successfully controlled, not eradicated, successfully controlled, has been the green iguana, which has been a species that has caused quite a number of impacts. So these impacts are felt not only, of course, in Britain, but around the world and across on the UK overseas territories. So again, coming back to Britain, this is in the inset at the top corner is the harlequin ladybird, Harmonia axyridis, and this is a species that I've studied a lot over the years, and it's just to give another demonstration of the kind of impacts that can be had. So this is a species of ladybird that's native to Asia, never intentionally introduced into Britain, but arrived first recorded in 2004, and it's a voracious predator. It also can outcompete other species that feed on pest insects such as aphids. And the larger picture is of Adelia bipunctata, the two-spot ladybird. And we have seen over time from the analysis that we've done with the amazing data sets that have been pulled together through citizen science and the contributions of incredible volunteers, we've seen major declines in these two-spot ladybirds. In fact, 44% decline in their distribution, strongly correlated with the arrival of Harmonia axyridis. And a species perhaps that people are hearing about a lot is the yellow-legged hornet, Vespa velutina. And this is a species that has been recorded in Britain, but so far with amazing work from the National Bee Unit in AFRA, the information that flows through the alert system that we at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology run, then has been so far the nest removal for the species. So I've put some links on the screen here because you can get involved if you're not already on the lookout for this species. This is sure one to be on the lookout for and to record very, very promptly. You can see its bright yellow legs, but if you see anything that kind of looks like that, don't hesitate to report it, and we can check your record is submitted with a photo, and then there can be action to remove the nest. So this is a species of hornet that was native to Asia, arrived unintentionally into France, and was first recorded in Britain in 2016. And there's been records every year since, but there has been nest removal. It's a predator again, a voracious predator, will feed a lot on honeybees, but also on a whole variety of other wild pollinating insects as well. So now I'm going to come to the study that we carried out that Rob Cook led over the last few years with DEFRA. And there have been a number of studies looking at the economic impacts of invasive non-native species in the UK, and coming up with this figure of about £2 billion per year being the estimated economic cost of invasive non-native species in the UK. So that's a huge figure, and these costs come from agriculture, from forestry, from a whole variety of different effects. So, for example, in the Caribbean here, there's really big concerns about the economic impacts of invasive non-native species on tourism and recreation. You can see, for example, with that photo with the needles on the ground, that can really cause problems for people who are wanting to be using those really beautiful beaches, and that they bring, of course, money into the territories. But there hadn't been such a similar study trying to quantify the sort of overall impacts of invasive non-native species. So we have lots of case studies of the biodiversity impacts of invasive non-native species, including those that I just explained. And we know that they have a very widespread impact on biodiversity and the environment. So what we were attempting to do was gather all of the evidence that we could possibly find to be able to give a better kind of estimate and understanding of the magnitude of the biodiversity impact of invasive non-native species. So we were able to, in a lot of detail, look at terrestrial and freshwater vertebrates. So with the terrestrial mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and the freshwater fishes. We gathered a lot of evidence, and we were particularly looking at which of these native species are impacted by one or other invasive non-native species. So we looked at national red lists, we looked at the global IUCN red lists, and we extracted information from these reports. We looked at an impact database that had been put together in part through Olaf Boy's PhD. We looked at the non-native species information portal, conservation evidence, which is a a big site organised by the University of Cambridge. We went to that Chapter 4 database I mentioned from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform, Invasive Alien Species Assessment, and we went through lots of the GB non-native species Secretariat risk assessments. We just gathered all of the information into an impacts database. So we found more than 2,400 impact descriptions, which we synthesized, and these represented 885 direct interactions of invasive non-native species on native species. This is a figure summarizing for the terrestrial and freshwater vertebrates that I described. We were also able to use, there's a categorization system, the environmental impact categorization of alien taxa, which you can find lots more information about it on the IUCN website. It's often called ICAT. And we use the ICAT categories that align in a sense with the sort of structures that's used for the red listing categories. So it's a scale going from kind of minor impacts through to massive impact, with massive impacts being in relation to an irreversible local extinction. We also use the data deficient category as well when it was not possible to be able to look at the magnitude of the impact. So we were able to extract the information from all of those data sources and put them into one of these categories. And so here you can see the number of species represented for each of those different taxonomic groups, that the taxonomic groups being shown along the x-axis. And you can see that 100% of amphibians and reptiles, native species, are impacted by invasive non-native species, and similar with the freshwater fishes. Very high figures again for the birds and terrestrial mammals as well. But there are a number for which we don't have evidence of direct impact. But one of the other aspects that we're also interested to begin to think about is some of the indirect impacts. So if you have an impact on 100% of freshwater fishes, there's undoubtedly going to be some cascades of impacts on species that also interact with those freshwater fish. So at least 64%, so 199 of the 309 terrestrial and freshwater vertebrate species that we looked at had documented direct negative impacts from invasive non-native species. And we've highlighted these figures because at least we know this is a conservative estimate. This is for where we could find the evidence that was either a recorded impact or very strong expert knowledge. And direct negative impacts, we're looking at those direct impacts not mediated by another species. And so, as I said, there will be other impacts, many other impacts, which are mediated through another species. And we also looked at the kind of accumulation of information to see whether or not, from all of the information that we extracted, which was a lot, were we reaching some kind of point of saturation in terms of the likely kind of impact on the native species. And we're really not far off, it seemed, from this model here, but it's likely, of course, that it's going to be a higher number of species that are actually impacted. There will be evidence that we weren't able to find, or indeed, as of yet, we don't have that evidence available to us. And this is quite a complex diagram, particularly when it's only 6 o'clock here in the Caribbean, but I hope it's not too complicated for you all. But basically what we're looking at here is a list of some native species, and also then the invasive non-native species, and the squares represent kind of an interaction based on these impact magnitudes, with the red being massive and then the orangey colors being the other categories of impact. And so we can see that there are some of the species, for example, the Chinese mitten crab, which is impacting many different native species. And similarly, we can see that there are many native species that are impacted by many invasive non-native species. So another figure on the x-axis showing species of invasive non-native invasive non-native species, and then the number of interactions with native species on the y-axis. And the takeaway from this is that the top 24 invasive non-native species accounted for about 80% of all of the recorded native invasive non-native species interactions. So this doesn't mean to say that the others are having to, are a lesser concern. Of course, they're also a concern, but it's just interesting to note that there are some of these kind of super invasive non-native species that are having interactions across a whole variety of native species. And then when we look at the mechanisms of impact, we can see that predation is a really dominant mechanism. So again, this is looking with the mechanisms in the middle: predation, structural mechanisms, competition, physical, chemical, disease, hybridization. And these are the categories that are used within that IUCN system that I mentioned. And we can see that structural in the purple in the middle is also really important too. And so these will be changes to the kind of ecosystem structure, just as an example, and a whole variety of species that do this. Particularly, for example, plants such as rhododendron will have these kind of structural changes on their habitats. So this is the point that I'm going to hand over to Lucy Arthur, and I was really delighted to have the opportunity to co-supervise Lucy's master's project, which is a really exceptional project and provides a little bit more detail on impacts, and particularly on Carpa brotus. And so I'm delighted that Lucy's agreed to show us some of the results. So if you just tell me when to move slide, Lucy, I'll just move on to the next slide, but over to you.
Okay, thank you, Helen. So as Helen said, I'm going to talk a bit about my master's research, which was looking at this species, which is Carpobrotus edulis. It goes by a lot of common names, but they include ice plant or sour fig. It's a species which is native to South Africa, but has been introduced across the world really as garden ornaments or as dune stabilizers. And as a result, it has invaded coastal ecosystems across the world, including some of our coasts, particularly dunes, grasslands, and cliffs. Next slide, please. So it spreads really rapidly to form these vast, dense monocultures, and it's known to act as an ecosystem engineer. So it alters the soil chemical components and microbial communities. And also it's known to release harmful biochemical compounds. And all this kind of leads to it outcompeting native plant species. And then this has knock-on effects for native invertebrates and other animal species as well. So most of the research done on impacts of this species have been done in the Mediterranean region. So we're really kind of needing some research in our region to work out what impacts it's having over here. Next slide, please. So my research took place in Guernsey, which technically is not Great Britain, but is part of the British Isles. So it's going to be giving similar impacts to over here. And over there, sour fig is a major invasive species. And they actually have really brilliant teams of volunteers who go around and remove these invasions by hand. So it creates a great opportunity for researching the impacts, not only the immediate impacts of the invasions, but also the lasting impacts after these invasions have been removed. So that is what I was looking at in terms of plant species, but mainly invertebrate species and interactions between plants and pollinators. Next slide, please. So I'll give a kind of brief overview of my results. This was the results for plants. So you can see on the left that the invasions have negative impacts on plant species richness, but actually this recovered fairly well in the cleared sites. And then on the left is flower density, so the number of flowers or floral units in a given area. And this was very negatively impacted by the invasions, largely because the research took place outside of the main flowering season, which is really important to note, because obviously when it's creating these vast monocultures, when it's outside its flowering season, there's just hardly any flowers for the pollinators. And this was something that had lasting impacts as well. It hadn't fully recovered yet at these cleared sites. Next slide, please. So this is some of the results for invertebrates. The main takeaway from this is the middle two plots, which is the flower visitors. They are particularly negatively impacted, and that's obviously going to link back to that flower density, the number of flowers from the previous slide. So they've been, particularly impacted by the invasions, and then these impacts are lasting after the invasions have been cleared. In contrast, the non-flower visitors are impacted less so, and actually the abundance of the non-flower visitors was positively impacted in the invaded sites, largely down to grasshoppers and froghoppers. Next slide, please. And this is just some plant pollinator networks. So I know this is a bit messy and hard to read, but basically this is showing the impacts between the flowers and flower visiting invertebrates or pollinators. So on the left-hand green boxes are the plant species, and the right-hand boxes are the invertebrates that are visiting them. And you can clearly see from this that the invaded sites have networks which are a lot less complex, and that's going to mean that they're a lot less robust to changes. Cleared sites, from this, it looks like they recovered fairly well, though this was very site dependent. Some sites did recover really well and some didn't. So yeah, very mixed results on that. So that's a kind of quick overview of an example of an invasive and what impacts it's having. So back to you, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And yeah, it was a really fascinating project, and I think it really shows that opportunity that there is the possibility to do something about these invasive non-native species and to make a difference as a consequence. And also, yeah, fantastic noting the amazing work of volunteers in terms of being involved with clearing that plant. So yeah, thank you very much, Lucy. Fascinating. So just to go back to our broader study and to give some of those headline figures, that at least 64% of the native terrestrial and freshwater vertebrate species we found documented direct negative impacts from invasive non-native species. And when we did this modeling, that accumulation curve that I showed you suggested that this is it's likely to be higher and estimated about 224 species. And that a small number of the invasive non-native species account for a very large share of the total impact. The top 24 invasive non-native species accounting for 80% of all of the recorded native invasive non-native species interactions. And also, just as shown you through a variety of the figures, that multiple invasive non-native species often impact the same species, with at least 43% of all native terrestrial and freshwater vertebrates and 67% of impacted species facing pressure from multiple invaders, and some species, such as the brown trout, impacted by at least 15 invasive non-native species. So going forward, sort of recommendations, we think that it's been really useful to gather this information, and it's fantastic that we have this evidence of impacts. But it is, as you can see, currently quite fragmented in a lot of different places. And we feel that bringing it together into a living database would be really, really useful for long-term reporting. And just capturing that information on impacts is really important. I feel that for a long time within the field of biological invasions, we felt that sort of evidence of impacts is not well documented and not well coordinated. And yet we know that these impacts are happening, and we see these impacts all around us. And so it's just really important that we're able to gather that empirical information into a system so that we can summarize it and report from it. And the way in which we went about it, we used a variety of different assessment methods. So not only synthesizing the information from published papers, for example, or from online data systems, but you also using expert elicitation. So we had a number of workshops where we gathered experts together, and huge thanks to them if any of them are listening on the webinar today. We had really fascinating discussions, and were able to gather that information into our database, but also using modeling approaches as well. And by combining all these diverse evidence sources, we can reduce the bias towards away from well-studied species and begin to look at some of those other species, but also to distinguish evidence gaps from true absences of impact. And I think that's really important, that we are able to better do that and to have this more comprehensive understanding of the biodiversity and ecosystem impacts that these species are having. And the approach that we've used, where we've gathered all of the information, we have started to extend it. We have 3 more amazing master students from the University of Exeter who are also working on impacts and some of the gaps that we identified through the previous study. So extending this approach to other taxa, to other habitats and other environments is going to be really useful and helping us to have this better understanding of the overall impacts of invasive non-native species. I just thought I'd finish by mentioning a project that I'm also involved with at the moment, that's funded through the Horizon and through the Horizon funding of the European Union. It's a project called One Stop, and I have the pleasure of co-leading it with Quentin Groom from the Meiser Botanic Gardens in Belgium. And it's a 3.5-year project where, again, we're thinking a lot about impact, and we have a whole work package that's related to modeling and partly looking at impact of species, invasive non-native species on red-listed species, and other modeling approaches as well. But it's also looking at raising the technology readiness levels of a whole variety of different tools to be able to help us in detection, prioritization, also thinking about dissemination, and also informing policy through policy briefs. So it's a very exciting project. We're using a lot of tools such as, for example, air DNA, and also computer vision and AI to be able to enhance our abilities to detect these species, and also for prioritization exercises as well. So we have a website with lots more information. I'd really encourage you to take a look at it. And I'm really hopeful that some of the tools and technologies that we test through One Stop will, of course, have applications at the national as well as the European and global scales as well. So it just leaves me to thank you very much for being here and for listening to this presentation. Again, huge thanks to Lucy and Lucy for Lucy Cornwell for organising this, and Lucy Arthur for her contributions. And as always, the Non-Native Species Secretariat, we're so fortunate, I feel, in Britain to have the Non-Native Species Secretariat coordinating activity around invasive non-native species, and just want to express my appreciation to all of the team for all of your amazing work. So back to you, Lucy.
Oh, thank you, Helen, and thank you both for those brilliant talks. The impacts research is a worrying but really fantastic piece of work. It's really helpful to have that kind of evidence of impacts to show why this is such an important issue. And Lucy, it's really great to have like a clear example of an invasive plant having an impact on native biodiversity. I think we've got plenty of time for questions, and I'm sure there will be some. So if you have questions, please pop those in the chat box or the Q&A. But I have a quick one first of all. Will you be publishing your findings?
Yes, in fact, we just submitted a paper on Saturday, actually, and that's not saying that working on a Saturday is a good thing to do, but I was transiting between one place and another in the Caribbean, so it was a good opportunity to submit that paper. So we have just submitted a paper on the actual sort of structure of the data system, which we're really excited about, because I think one of the important aspects of the study as well was about that kind of complexity and recognizing the kind of multiple ways in which these invasive non-native species can interact, both directly on species, but also on the habitats that then have further impacts on species. So that paper is already underway. And then the wider actual results that we have gathered, we are also going to publish. But the report will also be available through the ICF and DEFRA.
Brilliant. Lucy, are you thinking of publishing yours?
Yes, hopefully at some point, yeah, hoping to do that, but finding the time is difficult to work on it, but yeah.
No, that's great. We'll definitely look out for it and share it with everyone who's joined today. I'm just going to have a quick look at questions. Okay, so we've got one in the chat. So from someone who says that they really struggle to engage landowners who have Himalayan balsam to help control or eradicate it, particularly along watercourses. There seems to be no incentives in terms of enforcement in practice or monetary penalties. I'm not sure if there's anyone on the call who could answer that one. I mean, I can take that away and run it past our policy team or the inspectorate, who should be able to advise if there's anything specific.
I mean, I could say I can't comment on the enforcement or monetary penalties, but in terms of the growing evidence around Himalayan balsam and the impacts it's having along waterways, and also, in some ways there's analogies with the Carpobrotis example that Lucy gave, and sometimes people think that they're seeing a lot of pollinating insects visiting the Himalayan balsam, and indeed they almost certainly are, but it's for sure changing those kind of interaction networks, and also having profound effects in terms of negative effects on the kind of erosion along those riverbanks. So perhaps in terms of engaging landowners, it's I think looking at some of the more recent reports that are coming out on Himalayan balsam and hoping to compel them even further through, I'm sure, the excellent communication that you're already doing around it, maybe that can be helpful. And I think, in terms of understanding the impacts of these species, I think there's multiple benefits for that, including around communication and helping people to better understand that that they are invasive non-native species are having a really major and growing impact on our native biodiversity and ecosystems.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Okay, we have another one. So someone says, thank you for your presentation. I noticed on one of your graphs that Wells catfish was quite high up on the list of risk. Is there any further research ongoing to better understand the risk of this species? So they work in fisheries and they're significantly concerned about the risk they have on freshwater species. They're now recruiting consistently due to higher than average temperatures.
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. So I'm definitely not a fish expert, and I'm sure you will know far more than I am, and you're really welcome to to say further at this point about it. So I'm not aware. I'm sure there is further research, and I'm sure we can find out what is happening. And I think that's the wonderful role of the non-native species secretariat, is in terms of that kind of coordination between us. So I don't think I have anything useful to add, but I think it is really fascinating around that aspect to do with the recruiting consistently due to the higher than average temperatures. And it does bring a really important point out that we are anticipating that with climate change, that the interaction between climate change and invasive non-native species is going to be quite profound. And this will be for across taxa. We know that for a number of the insects, for instance, for example, some of the ant species, that they're more likely to thrive within Britain as a consequence of the warming climate. So I think that aspect around the higher than average temperatures is really interesting, and certainly I'm going to go away and look up more about that species, but I don't think I have anything useful to add. But I don't know if anyone else does, Lucy, or...
Yeah, I can't see anyone in the chat, but we can definitely share. We can go away and have a look at that as well and share anything that we find. There's a good point in the chat as well. So from Alison, it says that catchment-based approach groups are a great way of making connections to work at a catchment or landscape scale to deal with INS. So that relates to the Himalayan balsam question earlier. Rose has asked if there are any useful tools or reports on Himalayan balsam. Do you come across anything, Helen?
Yes, there are new studies coming out on Himalayan balsam, and particularly around looking at interactions with a variety of different invertebrates. And I think what's really interesting with Himalayan balsam, and indeed a number of these invasive non-native plant species, is the interactions below ground as well as above ground. Yeah, across a variety of different invasive non-native species plants, I think there's been some really exciting work coming out quite recently around the sort of below ground interactions, including with Himalayan balsam as well. So we can definitely share the links to some of those papers, and yeah, showing the adverse impacts and changes to these ecological communities. And I think one of the aspects that of a paper that I saw quite a while ago actually, but it's really stayed in my mind, is when you look at the kind of extent of the plant above the ground, if you then think below the ground and think about that kind of footprint that that species is having below ground as well, it's really quite stark to think quite how huge those impacts can be. And of course, when thinking about the impacts, we are often focusing on those species or habitats, the aspects of it that it's easier for us to see, such as the above ground. But of course, below ground, there's going to be all kinds of impacts as well, including on nutrient cycling, for example. So there's been some really, really good and recent studies around these kind of more detailed look into all of these different impacts. We can definitely share some of those links.
Yeah, that sounds great. It'd be really useful. Emily says, thank you, Helen. This has been really interesting and a very engaging presentation of your research. Is the intention for there to be subsequent research with a focus on the top 24 in species mitigation or control that account for the majority of interactions?
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. I think that, one of the ways in which the work that we've been doing will have a kind of direct application is through risk assessments, for example, and feeding into risk assessments. And again, great work for the Non-Native Species Secretariat in terms of coordinating activity around risk assessments. So being able to feed into those with this extra information is going to be really useful. But also as new risk assessments come about, or new species are kind of on the horizon or are going to be risk assessed, then we can use these kind of processes to gather that information. So that's one way in which this information may well be used. But, I think in terms of sort of the mitigation and control, and in terms of the management of invasive non-native species, it's really on a case-by-case basis. And we know that for some species, it's easier than for other species. So I think that whole kind of risk management is a separate part to look at. And of course, information with respect to the species with the highest impact is one part of consideration for a kind of prioritization of which species should be managed, but it's also around, what is actually feasible and practical to be able to do. And still we know that preventing species arriving is the most important it's the most important approach to mitigating the impacts of invasive non-native species, and that then leads me to point to the excellent resources on the Non-Native Species Secretariat website around kind of bee plant wise and check clean dry. So I think in terms of thinking about those top 24 invasive non-native species, it would have to be on a case-by-case basis. And for some of them, there will already be management in place, whether it be at a local scale. For others, it's quite possible that it's going to be very difficult to do anything about them.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to say that we haven't paid Helen to to say any of this.
No, that's true, but I am a big fan.
If anyone has any more questions, can just add them to the chat. We've still got a few minutes. Ruth has just pointed out that Yorkshire Wildlife Trust have produced a fun short film about crayfish on YouTube. There are lots of amazing resources that are coming out through Invasive Species Week that people have produced and all year round. So do check that out. And I'm going to try and add as many of those as I can to the Invasive Species Week web pages so you can have a look at those. Got one question here from Simon. So it says, thanks, Helen. Do you see any potential benefit in replicating this kind of work at a regional level within GB so as to prioritise control and eradication efforts at a more local level?
Yeah, I think that would be really fantastic. And we could break down some of the information that we have within our data base based on a regional level, looking at some of the kind of distribution maps, for example. There could be some models that we could do using that information. So I think that's the thing to say, that the database of sort of evidence of interactions and between invasive non-native species and native species that we have gathered together could be used in a lot of different ways for a whole variety of different research purposes as well. But I think it would be really useful to look at regional levels as well. And indeed, you know, at local scales as well. I think it's really important to be thinking about that kind of local context. We know that the impacts of invasive non-native species are often quite context specific. So we know that some of the species could have really massive impacts in a certain location and lesser impacts in another location. And so I think understanding that kind of detail and those dynamics of those interactions is really important, and spatial scale is an important aspect as well. So yeah, excellent point. Thank you.
A sort of similar question in a way here. So Harriet asks, what makes Himalayan balsam a problem in the UK but not in its native area?
Yeah, that's a really, really excellent question. And we often see with some of the invasive non-native species that, you know, Carpobrotus edulis, when I saw the in South Africa, I saw it being surrounded by penguins. I sometimes used to include a picture in talks because it was a really kind of scraggly little plant in the dune system, not forming this really extensive mat to that level in the place where I was looking with the penguins. And we know that once a species is moved out of its native range to a new area, it can undergo a whole variety of different processes that mean that it's more problematic in that new region. And it might be that it's been released from herbivores, for instance, that may well be interacting with it and controlling it. In the case of some of the plants, we know that some of the animals are released from their parasites. We know that, for example, with the Argentine ant, that when they're outside of their native range, they can form super colonies that they don't form in their native range. And that's based around the fact that in the native range, the colonies, the communication between them and the aggression between them means that they stay relatively small in comparison to the super colonies that we see, but that communication is broken down in the invaded range, and so they're not so aggressive to one another. So the colonies kind of join up and they become very large. So I think that getting a better understanding of those factors and the differences between the native and the invaded range are really important. But it is something that we do see quite often with invasive non-native species.
Alison asked whether healthy ecosystems and habitats are less vulnerable to invasion and how much information exists about this.
Yeah, gosh, really, really excellent questions. And there is quite a lot of published work looking at the impacts of disturbance and degradation of habitats in terms of then invasive non-native species propagating in those areas. And, you know, there has been some work around, you know, whether invasive non-native species are actually kind of passengers, if you like, of these kind of broader environmental change. And that's for sure is the case in some situations. But in other situations, actually, the invasive non-native species is a cause of that further degradation. And one thing that we've just been chatting about recently within the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology amongst a few of the colleagues is that these species can also contribute to the fragmentation of habitats. If you think about the way in which, for example, rhododendron is growing through woodlands, it's really altering the structure of those woodlands, and in some senses fragmenting those woodlands and causing barriers to the movement of some species. So there is good research that shows that systems that are in better condition are in some cases, less likely to be invaded by invasive non-native species. But again, context is all important, and that is not always the case.
Yeah, thank you. One more here. So thank you very much for the interesting presentations. Are any of you working on how INS might affect the assessment of ecological status as set out in the Water Framework Directive? So with the current tools, they find that often rivers are classified as having good ecological status, yet they know that they're home to species such as zebra mussels, which creates an inconsistency. So I think maybe they're based in Spain because they're looking for tools to try and resolve the inconsistency.
There's some fantastic work that has been going on from Queen Mary University in London around the species, and also another person who would be great to contact in the University of Cambridge. We can provide some more details for them specifically around that question. We've used evidence and information that comes through some of the reports in other studies to look at the interactions between different species and their impacts. And my understanding is certainly in Britain that a number of the species would be, a number of the invasive non-native species would be listed as flagged to not having not representing good water quality, but it's not my area of expertise in terms of the Water Framework Directive. But we can certainly dig out some information, and I can send some across to Lucy and particular papers that have contact details of others on it.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful. Thank you. I had a quick question. Was there anything that surprised you in the impacts research, like any of the kind of headlines that came out, or even any of the detail?
Yeah, that is a really, really excellent question. I think, the number of impacts that some of these species are, the number of native species that some of these invasive non-native species are impacting was really, that is a very high figure for some of those species. So that kind of breadth of impacts is happening from some of those invasive non-native species. I think that was quite surprising. I'm going to give Lucy a short while to think about that in case Lucy wants to come in and say anything, but don't feel obliged, Lucy, at all if there was something. So Lucy, I would say, Lucy Arthur worked with us straight after her master's to help us in this task of compiling this information and pulling this information together. So I will come to her in a moment just in case she has any thoughts on what was surprising. But I think actually, one of the wonderful things about the project as well was coming together with other experts through these workshops and the conversations that we had. And for example, I can remember sitting with Trevor Reynolds and David Aldridge, Trevor Reynolds from Environment Agency, David Aldridge from the University of Cambridge, and we were thinking about the freshwater systems. And actually what was really just fascinating was this aspect around the context that we think about and how the context is really important in terms of these impacts. But it's the sort of detail that we were looking at. So they were talking about, the kind of the riverbed, for example, whether it's silty or gravelly, will have quite a big impact. Of course, I'm not a freshwater ecologist, but of course, it's really intuitive that that is really important, for example, for the egg-laying behaviour of some fish and indeed a variety of invertebrates as well. And so hearing their detailed discussions around how those interactions might play out in different kind of water bodies and different water systems was really, really fascinating. So that was kind of off the topic of what you actually asked, Lucy, but it brought me back to those fascinating conversations and just, how amazing the experts were who contributed so much to the study. I don't know if you had any highlights, Lucy, or anything from the study or.
Yeah, I was just going to say, similar to what you were saying with the number of natives that are impacted by a given invasive, it kind of works both ways as well, and how some natives are impacted by a quite high number of invasives as well.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of seeing it all out in that database, it makes you realise, basically.
Yeah, it's a really important piece of work.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was, and it was really, a great great privilege to be able to carry out that work. And yeah, we really hope that that database will stay alive, and we'll keep documenting it with further evidence of impacts. And if people are aware of good information sources, we'd be delighted to hear from them. But I think as well, these kind of observations that people make on the ground when they're out, for example, clearing the Himalayan balsam or working in the field, it's really good to have those kind of observations, and it'd be really fantastic to be able to better document the impacts of these species.
Yeah. Okay, we've got one. I don't think this is so much a question, but Stephen is just noting a few things. So COVID lockdown effect showing the importance of like transmission by vehicles in species migration. And then a couple of predictions of what might be an issue in future. So Vespa orientalis and termites.
Yes, thank you for those points. It's really interesting to say we did carry out the horizon scanning for Britain last year. I lose track of the time, and that's what I'm doing over here in the Caribbean at the moment, is horizon scanning, making predictions of what is coming next here in, well, this week it will be for the Cayman Islands. And certainly we have considered Vespa orientalis, and we have been looking at the termites as well. But if you want to have a look at the information on that horizon scanning, it's available on the Non-Native Species Secretariat website, with a sort of full list of species where we've looked across marine, terrestrial, and freshwater systems. And I should say, actually, so we, as part of the study as well, just had a short workshop with marine experts, because we're really mindful that kind of evidence of impacts in the marine environment, we are really kind of lacking that information. So we know that the impacts are happening. We of course know that, and people can see that if they go and visit beaches and see some of the algae, for instance. But we did hold a workshop again with some amazing marine experts to be thinking about how could we kind of better document impacts within marine systems as well, and where might that information be, and how important is context in that regard as well. So yeah, marine species as well are important, I wanted to say, of course.
Yes, definitely. Okay, I think we're almost at time, so I just wanted to say thank you very much to everyone for attending, and thank you so much to both of our speakers for such brilliant talks and a really, really interesting question section as well. And thank you, Helen, for getting up so early. I know it's very early in the Caribbean.
That's no problem. It's been a real pleasure to be with everyone, and yeah, thank you very much, Lucy, for inviting us, and thank you, Lucy Arthur, for your excellent contribution within the talk as well. It was, yeah, lovely being with you all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very
thanks,
much,
everyone.
everyone.